Public Policy and Research Institute of Zimbabwe. Dr. Moyo, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Modise. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, honorable members here present. We appreciate that you have taken your time to join us in this very important meeting. Can you tell me, am I audible enough, Modise?
We might need you to raise your voice a bit. You are audible, but just a little bit low.
Okay. Right. That's better now.
Yes, you are a little bit better. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I was saying, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, honorable members who are here, and we appreciate that you have taken your time to join us in this very important exercise of thinking through and tapping from your experience, tapping from your brains, tapping from your knowledge as we build this model, law on public financial management. And I'm very happy that we are starting. I'm very happy that you are here. Even if others are not yet there, they will join us, as the SG has said. Now, to kickstart our meeting, I will invite our very own the Secretary General, Honorable Boema Sekoma, to welcome us. Madam SG, please.
Good morning, bon dia. Allow me to recognize, there's an echo. Allow me to recognize and respect the protocol that is being established this morning. Our keynote speaker, Honorable Brian Dube, a member of Parliament and the Deputy Secretary General of Sadc Organizations of Public Accounts Committees, SADC, and the Public Accounts Committee Chairperson in the Republic of Zimbabwe Parliament. Allow me to recognize you, our distinguished members of Parliament, serving in committees responsible for public accounts, finance, budget, anti-corruption, and good governance of the SADC member parliaments. I'd also like to recognize our distinguished legal drafter, Mr. Daniel Greenberg, who is working with us tirelessly on this drafting process of the Public Financial Management Model Law. I'd also like to recognize and thank our meeting facilitator, Honorable Dr. Gordon Moyo, whose credentials have been shared with you earlier. Allow me to also thank and recognize the members of the Technical Working Group who work with us tirelessly for us to achieve our goals. Representatives of the media organizations present today, staff of the Sadc Parliamentary Forum and member parliaments, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. It's with sheer pleasure and immense deference that I welcome chairpersons and honorable members of the various standing committees represented here today from our SADC national parliaments to this consultative session, which is held prior to the adoption of the Public Financial Model Law. Whilst I know that several of you have tight and busy schedules in your respective countries, I wish to express gratitude for your time and dedication to this consultation, which is of paramount importance to the SADC Parliamentary Forum and to the SADC region at large. Honorable members, first of all, I would like to welcome you warmly to this event, which is organized under the auspices of the Sadc Parliamentary Forum. Some of you already serve as representatives at the Sadc Parliamentary Forum at the regional level, and you sit in various standing committees and organs of the Sadc Parliamentary Forum. For those who are interacting with the Sadc Parliamentary Forum for the first time, you are welcome. And please know that the Sadc Parliamentary Forum is also your home and is an extension of a national parliament at the regional level, hopefully a Sadc parliament in the near future. Honorable members, I applaud your commitment to public financial management, and I wish that we may soon meet in other initiatives which involve the forum in collaboration with your national parliaments. A consolidated schedule has been shared where various capacity building initiatives will be rolled out between now and December 2022. I encourage you to take interest and participate in these initiatives. Honorable members, as you may be aware, the forum is conducting a series of consultative sessions on this Sadc model law on public financial management. And key stakeholders naturally include parliamentary committees dealing with public financial management. I wish to highlight that whilst a number of stakeholders, such as auditors general, technical staff from line ministries and accounts general have been engaged, this session is the main session which is of a parliamentary nature and takes on board views from members of parliament occupying committee positions responsible for public financial management. Honorable members, the standing committees involved today are those which are, in our view, deemed to be directly linked to public financial management processes in one way or the other. The audience today thus includes chairpersons of public accounts committees, which we believe oversee state expenditure, as well as budget committees and committees pertaining to governance matters. The functions of these standing committees relate to oversight of public financial management processes in view of holding government to account on the carriage of public financial management proceedings, and their existence are thus sacrosanct to checks and balances prevailing in any healthy democracy. Honorable members, the engagement of standing committees of parliament is all the more significant since this model law is couched from the angle of parliamentary oversight on public financial management. In other words, from the perspective of the different oversight mechanisms which Parliament holds over public financial management processes of the state. The tabling of the budget, the adoption of the budget-related legislation, the consideration of the report of the Auditor General, or the examination of governance reports are all matters that are traditionally addressed by your standing committees at Parliament across the Sadc region, prior to reporting same to Parliament sitting in plenary. Honorable members, the Sadc model law on public financial management thus aims to heighten this aspect of parliamentary oversight. It has adequate powers to firstly uncover discrepancies and irregularities in public financial management systems as reported, and secondly, take corrective action which can be acted upon and enforced. Honorable members, in addition, your standing committees of parliament are constituted of members of parliament who hold representative budgetary and legislative functions as well. This consultative session thus also functions as a sensitization campaign for members of parliament to be acquainted to international best practices concerning public financial management, which are imbibed in the provisions of the Sadc model law before you. Indeed, honorable members, with COVID-19 and other perilous phenomena which afflicted the global financial system in the last decade, there are norms and best practices on prudential planning which have emerged concerning public financial management, many of which have found their way into this draft model law. For instance, it is generally accepted worldwide that Public Accounts Committee should exercise robust oversight over the appropriation and expenditure process, and that the debt ceiling should not exceed 60% of GDP. Altogether, honorable members, you will kindly find that whilst the model law refers to parliamentary oversight in different provisions, Part 5 and Part 6 refers to parliamentary control over public financial management processes in particular. You are thus kindly requested to pay special attention to those parts as you engage on the provisions of the model law today. Honorable members, colleagues, and distinguished participants, our expectations from you today are very straightforward. We look forward to your open, frank discussions, which the legal drafter often gracefully takes on board and incorporates them or considers them for incorporation at a later stage. I wish to reiterate that the model law has been pitched from the angle of parliamentary oversight, and thus the model law before you generally focuses on the relationship between Parliament and parties administering the public financial management system. Your views will thus be awaited on the adequacy of the provisions in view of reinforcing the oversight functions of Parliament in this regard. You are therefore encouraged to submit written submissions from your committees for consideration by the legal drafter. Honourable members, you'll note that, for instance, the powers of the Public Accounts Committee under Section 46 include to make inquiries and refer irregularities found to law enforcement authorities, including anti-corruption agencies. This, honourable members, is to ensure that the reports of the committee are not tabled and then confined to the drawers, but that there is a consistent follow-up on the matter. In addition, the Public Accounts Committee will also supervise a complaints portal regarding public financial management, and will have an opportunity to report to Parliament regarding the same. Honourable members, I believe you'll concur that these are entirely new proposals which deserve to be considered by yourselves in view of validating this model law at a later stage. Honourable members, I wish to state at this point that coming forward with a model law on public financial management is a very ambitious feat, yet quintessential to the Sadc region. There is no similar model on public financial management which has been developed across the globe. So far, and members of Parliament today are thus pioneering and creating history. In this regard, participants today will realize that this model law will not only serve to guide the Sadc region, but the whole world. This model law, we are confident, constitutes the building blocks for a better world where robust public financial management systems prevail. While there will always be room for improvement, and I underlined, the basic ingredients for good governance and sound public financial management are contained within the provisions of this draft model law. On our members, having said what I have said so far, there is no doubt that standing committees of Parliament will play a central role in of the model law once it has been adopted by the Sadc Parliamentary Forum policymakers referred to as the Plenary Assembly. Members of Parliament will be at the center stage of the domestication process by pushing for same with line ministries and other departments through parliamentary questions and other interventions. In addition, it is expected that members of Parliament will liaise with the dedicated organ of the forum, the Regional Parliamentary Model Law Oversight Committee, which is made out of chairpersons of all standing committees of the regional committees of the Sadc Parliamentary Forum, to furnish reports and shadow reports on domestication progress and challenges encountered in that respect. I therefore encourage you to approach our chairpersons and do exactly that for the progress of our region. We also envisage to develop scorecards on the model law, and it is expected that same will be filled at national level by a multi-stakeholder working group consisting of members of Parliament, together with line ministries and departments. Your input today thus constitute the beginning of a long and consistent engagement on the public financial model law. Honorable members, colleagues, and distinguished participants, I wish to end these remarks by expressing gratitude for your keen participation. In the 21st century, public funding is central to human and social development. Since this funding devolves on the running of public hospitals, of schools, or public infrastructure, all of which are essential to life itself. Without public funding, honorable members, the doors of schooling will be closed for some, and some households will run out of potable water, and many others. Therefore, there is no nation on earth which can survive without the yearly government budget, which injects funds into the economy. Honorable members, thus this public financial management normative standards are paramount to act as checks on public funding, and it is that a central tenet of the democratic framework of the Sadc region. Honorable members, even if the road ahead is a long and bumpy one, the Sadc model law on PFM is acting as a driver for change in the right direction, and compounded with a parliamentary impetus, it will surely carry us to the right destination. On this note, I wish to welcome you and wish you all a fruitful session. I thank you for your listening.
Thank you, Madam SG, for your submission. It was very comprehensive, and we are honored to have you as the SG of our regional parliament. Thank you very much. For now, allow me, Madam SG, to invite our guest of honor, who is the Deputy Secretary General of Sadc Organization of Public Accounts Committees. He is also an honorable member of Parliament for Gweru Urban constituency in Zimbabwe, and is the current chairperson of Public Accounts Committee in the Parliament of Zimbabwe. And above that, he is an award-winning human rights lawyer, my friend, Honorable Brian Dube. The platform is yours.
Thank you very much, facilitator, and thank you very much, SG. I hope I am audible. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Thank you very much. Greetings to you all, friends and colleagues. Myself and on behalf of SADC, we want to express our gratitude to SADC PF for this opportunity given to us to present a message of support or keynote address to this important meeting. SADC believes that the SADC PF and SADC share a similar vision and mission in as far as the monetary issues in SADC are concerned. SADC aims to strengthen good governance, promoting transparency through mutual support, knowledge and experience sharing among PAC committees from the region as a means of enhancing oversight. SADC is a voluntary organization which was established in 2003 and is composed of public accounts or similar committees representing 13 SADC parliaments. SADC is pleased to note that this event comes at a crucial time in the history of our two organizations, whereby on the 21st of February 2022, SADC office bearers and SADC PF leadership will meet in Windhoek, Namibia, to sign a memorandum of understanding between SADC and SADC PF. The MOU serves to recognize the importance of complementarity of the mandates of the two institutions, and thus seeking to strengthen the cooperation for the mutual interest and common benefit of SADC parliaments and the SADC region at large. SADC PF agrees to cooperate and collaborate with SADC on matters of mutual interest and in an endeavor to foster the objectives of SADC aimed at promoting regional integration and to achieve development and economic growth in SADC member states. The parties agreed to closely collaborate with each other in order to achieve their common objectives. SADC and SADC PF will support each other in the following areas: joint research and knowledge production, dialogue and consensus building, capacity enhancement, annual joint working and review sessions, and bilateral consultations. Based on the facts highlighted above, SADC is in full support of the development of a SADC model law on public finance management. In parliamentary democracies, PACs or similar committees assume a position of great importance. Administrative accountability to the legislature has become the sine qua non of such parliamentary systems. However, the phenomenon of multiplicity of governmental activities has made the task of legislatures extremely complex as well as diversified. By its very nature, Parliament cannot exercise effective control over activities of the executive without using such standing committees. Administrative accountability to the legislature through committees has been the hallmark of democratic systems. In most countries, PAC enjoy a high profile in the committee systems. As SADC, we are therefore pleased to partner with SADC PF, and we look forward to a fruitful partnership. It is SADC's hope that the model law will also then be domesticated by the respective member states, and that there will be actually uniformity in the functions and exercise of the respective committees in the fight against corruption, in the fight against abuse of national resources, in the fight against non-disclosure or failure to have transparency in the way business is done. And above all, our wish as SADC is that all the national resources in SADC must be used to the mutual benefit of the nation and also for the growth of the economies as well as eradication of extreme poverty, which is a serious challenge that the region is currently facing. And it is my hope and prayer that the model law will actually be a good sign of the commitment by respective governments to make sure that the resources are properly taken care of and parliaments are empowered to do much more in terms of fighting the abuse of resources in our respective countries. Allow me to wish all of us a constructive deliberation throughout the session. Thank you, SG, and all honorable members and colleagues here.
Thank you very much, Honorable Dube. I was very excited to hear you say that the Sadc Park is fully committed to the model law that we are working on.
Thank you very much, Doc.
And because we are speaking Secretary General, that's very important for this process. Otherwise, thank you very much. We have done the initial phase of our program. We have been welcomed by the Honorable SG, and we have heard the keynote address from our guest of honor. And now we move on to tap from your brains. But before we do that, allow me to refreshen your minds and say, this meeting is meeting number 3. This consultative meeting is meeting number 3. Last week, we had a meeting with the Auditors General. We consulted them. We had an exciting engagement. And 2 days ago, we had a meeting with Ministries of Finance, Economic Development Planning. We had an exciting meeting, exciting engagement, and we tapped from their brains. And today, we have you, and you are a very important stakeholder because you are in the heart of it. You are coming from Parliament, and this is Parliament. Sadc is Parliament, and you are coming from Parliament. So you are very important. But before we go into the main subject, we would like to show you a very short video clip drawn from Uganda. I know Uganda is not part of SADC, so some of you might say, but why Uganda? It's important that we learn from other regions. What happens in other regions, whether within Africa or outside at times, it can have some bearings to us. So we want to draw some lessons from Uganda. So let's have a very short video, watch it and create images in your mind, questions and comments, and prepare yourself for deeper engagement. ICT, please. ICT.
Apologies, we're just loading it up.
Okay.
My name is Samson Kasumba, and this is The Focal Point. Let me begin with definitions, and I'll read the definition exactly the way it is. Corruption is the diversion of public resources for private, that is personal or none other than public use, and that's when one wants to gain or abuse a public authority or position for private gain and a weak public financial management system, leaving the poor open for corruption. Let's talk about corruption. And my guest this evening is Mr. Julius Kapwepwe, the Director of Programs at the Uganda Debt Network. You're very welcome, Julius.
Thank you. Yes, my pleasure to be here once more.
Since we met, do you think we are walking further on the right road to ending corruption, or are we stagnant?
I think generally the road is, we are moving forward towards curbing corruption, but the road is so rugged that we are stagnating somewhere, even though we seem to see light at the end of the tunnel.
Okay. There have been significant steps made by government, the establishment of the anti-corruption unit, the president talking about corruption and the fight against corruption. He told us this was Chisanja Hakuna Mchezo, but yet we continue to see loans, taxes and grants being used. Do you think they're used in a prudent manner? Now that we're even talking about building roads in Congo, one would say, what about the ones we still have to build here?
Yeah, I think generally, as you observe, His Excellency President Museveni has been critical against corruption. In fact, he has committed himself previously in 2006 onwards to date to zero tolerance to corruption. Beyond the words and big speeches, we seem to see an extent of positive move, but in some other areas we see certain loopholes that remain glaring. It is evident that as a country we've, if you looked at the case of, say, petty corruption or small corruption, I could say small corruption, kintu kidogo, that a police officer has stopped you at the roadside and you are parted with the 5,000 shillings, is bad and bad enough, but is not as damaging as the, for instance, grand corruption, where we seem to see syndicated way of stealing. If you looked at some of these projects, therefore, the loans and other public resources generally that have been used, we see those kinds of instances. So even the Sanja Hakuna Mchezo, some extent in terms of institutional establishment could have achieved, but we have also seen where billions have continued to disappear.
So are you basically saying that as a government, we should be, in the fight against corruption, we should be looking at return on investment? Don't invest 100 million in punishing somebody who stole 10 million. That in itself, is that corruption?
We took public sector reforms to weed out the bad apples, to remove the corrupt, and to generally do cleanup. That nonetheless continued creeping through, and even in 2000s to where we are, we seem to be ready for another set of reforms. So that means that, for instance, in terms of institutions, there are those institutions, if you want to deliver a service to Ugandans, that you do not need. And that's where we are coming from, that you do not have to invest billions for you to be able to deliver or even get back millions.
Let me ask, do you think, because the supplementary budgets are on the increase, they are now in the trillions, would you consider that in a subtle way as syndicated corruption? Because how come we budget and all the time we have some supplementary budgets and they seem to be now going...
Continued supplementary expenditures definitely undermine the credibility of the budget every financial year. That in Uganda, alas, has continued to be a creeping culture, and it is not the way to go.
Is it corruption?
The Constitution of Uganda of 1995, as amended, as well as the public finance and Accountability Act, Public Finance Management Act, is very categorical on how do you handle supplementaries. And it gives 3 conditions: unabsorbable, unforeseen, and unavoidable circumstances. Outside any of those 3, then it is a degree of corruption. In fact, if we took a sample of just this financial year, where we have seen about 6 supplementary budgets coming in day, evening, and night. Why? We need to look at specifics.
Do you have some examples?
Let's take just the COVID kind of related supplementaries.
Nobody could have seen COVID.
Precisely. But you're expected to deliver so much of masks across a spectrum of Ugandans. Have you received one yourself?
Never done. 82 billion.
Precisely, that's what we are talking about.
So if you
have a parliament that approves those and hides its own share, not through the main discussion on the parliamentary floor, but through a parliamentary commission. And in fact, even when you add up those billions of money, you still have certain sums of money, about 200 billion also, that is lingering and it is not clear on where exactly it is. Then it is construed as corruption.
Do you think we see that this is wrong? Or are we at the point where those of us raising issues about it are the ones seen as having a problem?
I have an impression that, for instance, if you looked across the spectrum of public servants, not everyone is a rotten tomato. There are those diligent ladies and gentlemen we know about that not only have earned accolades, but actually can be seen in the way they do their work and deliver results for this country. So some, yes, but not all of them across the spectrum.
Let's get to how we get those who govern us through our electoral processes. Some have argued that if the means is questionable, it can't bring an end that is unquestionable. How we raise money to finance electoral campaigns, do you think there is an issue there? Some have large sums, some don't. In fact, some presidential candidates have already suspended campaigns over matters of inavailability of campaign finance.
Precisely, researches have been done, and even logically, it is known that if you have a questionable start process, it will give you a questionable end result. So to the extent that, for instance, we are not very, very clear, we do not have a seal on how much money should be involved in the electoral process.
Shouldn't one campaign fundraise locally and internationally?
That is not a problem. We need to be clear on how much should be the extent of money during the electoral process. What should be the sources of prudent money for electoral process and any other process. So the Financial Intelligence Authority therefore comes into it.
District budgets being used to finance campaigns. I mean, if I am an incumbent, I am intending to run towards the elections, I use the district finances to grade roads and do all these sorts of things to show what I'm doing. Is that also, in your opinion, corruption? And is there a way even of dealing with it, or should we be relying on one's morality?
That would constitute corruption, definitely, if you have public resources being diverted at whatever level, including at the district. In fact, the bigger challenge is not at the district levels, but at the central government. Recalling that trillions of shillings that out of a given budget, for instance, for this financial year, the previous financial year, for a budget of about 45 trillion or 42 as in the previous financial years, it is just about 3 trillion that makes it to the local governments. Of course, part of which is used for service delivery, and maybe part of that is what is involved through corrupt means. So it means that the central government, which retains a huge chunk of the fiscal resources, is where we should even be putting a bigger eye. And the Auditor General has been very, very categorical on where some of these monies have been stolen from ministries, departments, and agencies of government. And therefore, to that extent, it is possible that it is those monies that make their way into the electoral process. And we think that the law going forward needs to come and be stronger and curb some of these tendencies that are creeping.
Do you think that as a nation, we understand that corruption, especially petty corruption, is as bad and dangerous as syndicated, or we now have corruption and corruption? In about 40 seconds.
We have, of course, petty corruption. We also have bureaucratic corruption, which is like the working with the systems that can frustrate. But we also have the grand or the political corruption. Of those three categories, the political corruption is where you seem to see syndicated type of affair. And we think that the syndicated one, the political or the grand corruption, is the most dangerous of the three.
Okay. Yeah. Julius Kapwepwe from Ugandan Debt Network, thank you so much for talking to us. Indeed, having been speaking about corruption, I don't want to be corrupt with time. Until next time, this has been The Focal Point.
Hello. Like the presenter there, I don't want to be corrupt with time. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching and listening. We don't have to discuss anything on this one. We just needed you to have a look and relate those interviews with whatever happens in your own country and in the region. For now, ladies and gentlemen, honorable members, allow me to invite our legal mind, our legal drafter of the draft model law. The process would be, you will make a presentation, but during the presentation, if you have something that you think you need to raise with him, please raise your hand. We will see your hand and we will engage. But otherwise, we will make a presentation. After a brief presentation, we will then open the house and we then engage. Then we can take from your inputs. Otherwise, Daniel, that's your time.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Daniel Greenberg. I am the Counsel for Domestic Legislation in the House of Commons in the United Kingdom Parliament. I am the General Editor of Westlaw UK for Thomson Reuters. I am the author of a number of legal dictionaries and works on legislation, and I have a national and international legislation drafting, training, and advisory practice. I join you this morning as the drafter of the Model Law on Public Financial Management for the SADC Parliamentary Forum. And I am very grateful for the introductions of the Honourable Dr. Moyo, our facilitator, who is a distinguished member of the technical working group and who has already, as a member of that group, contributed a number of very significant changes to the model law as it lies before you this morning. I am grateful for the introduction of the Honourable Secretary General, and I am also grateful for the introduction of the Honourable Brian Dubé, the keynote speaker this morning. I am grateful for the Honourable Brian Dubé's introduction of the topic and the model law to the forum today. And I am prospectively grateful to all of you for your challenges, comments, questions, and contributions on the development of the model law, which must be owned by parliamentarians as well as by citizens if it is going to achieve its objective. I would like to make two points by way of explaining to you all the approach that I have taken in drafting the provisions before I draw our attention to some specific provisions of the model law. At that point, I will hope to share my screen and take us through the model law, adverting to specific provisions that are likely to be of particular interest to honourable delegates today. But first, I would like to share with you two fundamental problems that the drafter of a law of this kind has to deal with. First, the law has to balance a number of different conflicting concepts and desiderata. In particular, I start with simplicity and certainty. It is the aim of all of us that this model law should be sufficiently simple for it to be able to be domesticated and after domestication applied and enforced in an effective and clear way. We want to keep things simple. However, we have to balance simplicity with the demands of certainty. It doesn't help to put in something which is a mere pious hope without sufficient detail to be certain as to what the law requires. I was struck, as I'm sure honourable delegates were, during the video clip we just heard. I was struck by how easy it is to all agree that corruption is bad and how difficult it is to all agree on exactly what corruption means or exactly what we do or don't want to do about it in particular respects. So the law has to be simple so that we all accept and understand its underpinning precepts, but it has to have enough detail to give certainty as to what it is actually meant to achieve for citizens on the road and in the workplace. Secondly, we have to balance clarity and flexibility. It would be absolutely pointless to present the model law as a snapshot of where we happen to be, a frozen snapshot of where we happen to be on public financial management principles and practice today. You, Honourable Madam Secretary General, you do not wish to present to the forum for adoption a law that is bound to become obsolete within days of its having been approved and implemented. So it has to be flexible, but if it's too flexible, it's not clear. And again, there's no point producing something and approving something that is so flexible, no one knows what it's meant to achieve today. I'll give you an example. I'll give you two examples, if I may. Crypto assets. Cryptocurrency and crypto assets in various forms present one of the biggest public financial management challenges today for countries all around the world. Central banks may decide to issue their own cryptocurrency, and some central banks are doing so. Central banks may decide not to, but one thing we can all promise ourselves, and that is a central bank that sets its face against issuing cryptocurrency is not going to be able to avoid having an effective policy on the valuation and management of cryptocurrency, because there will be cryptocurrencies entering the public financial domain in one form or another, be it only as part of a portfolio of assets of a state-owned enterprise that is on the public debt balance sheet, for example, or for one or other of a multiplicity of reasons. And yet, we cannot provide today for effective audit of crypto assets, for effective valuation of crypto assets. We don't know how cryptocurrencies and other crypto assets are going to be used in a month, let alone in 10 years' time. This is an example, therefore, of how the model law balances flexibility against clarity. When we come to part 12 of the model law later in my presentation, you will see that we are broadly adopting the regulatory principles in accordance with a decision made by our own technical working group, of which the Honourable Facilitator, Dr. Gordon Moyo, is a member. And that draws, amongst other things, on principles established by the London School of Economics and Political Sciences Institute of Global Affairs, Basic Principles for Regulating Crypto Assets, their fourth draft of the 9th of January 2019, and those principles in the fourth draft remain the principles that are applied today. Broad principles that we believe are likely to be timeless, but with powers to apply a certainty and simple but accurate mechanism to enact those broad principles, to embrace changing real-world developments in relation to the use and valuation of cryptocurrencies and other crypto assets. Third, accessibility and accuracy. Distinguished delegates today are all parliamentarians, and you are all well used to reading and understanding a technical document of this kind, both in terms of its legal content, its legislative content, and indeed its financial professional content. But we are all of us writing a law in which we hope the citizenry can have confidence and trust. And as a parliamentary drafter of 35 years standing, I believe passionately in the importance of individual citizens feeling able at least to understand the basic structure of an act of parliament in a matter that is as central to their well-being as public financial management. Yes, there will be details of the act that require to be accurate, and because they are accurate, they will be beyond the comprehension of most citizens without a background in law or finance or both. But the fundamental principles of public financial management should be articulated in the model law, and we will see this, I hope, in a few moments, in a way that an individual citizen can say to herself or himself, this represents the founding principles on which my money is raised and handled by the parliamentarians who serve me. And finally, in terms of balancing principles, we have to balance, balancing different tensions. We have to balance the articulation of principle against enforcement. I was struck in the video clip that we heard a few moments ago, I was struck by the reference to, should we rely on people's personal morality? And you might expect, honourable delegates, that as a lawyer, I would say, of course not. We never rely on people's morality. We throw the law at it. We tie people up with law. But that's very much not how I feel. I feel that a law that sets out to be prescriptive and stultifying immediately creates an avoidance appetite, if you like. And I believe, as one of the conversants in the video clip said, I believe that public sector workers, by and large, do wish to embrace and embody, live up to the virtues of public responsibility. But we have to articulate those in a form in which people can understand what is expected of them. And then we have not to be naive. We have to accept that there will be lapses, and where there are lapses, people must be aware, and the citizens must be aware, that the mechanism exists to deal with lapses in a real, effective, efficient, and timely way. And we will look at part 16, which deals with part 11 and part 16, dealing with financial misconduct and misuse and offences under the model law. We will look at that with that balance in mind. The second point I wish to make before I take us through some provisions of the model law is to echo a point made by the Honourable Brian Dubé, our keynote speaker today, in his distinguished address, in which he drew our attention to the complexity of the multiplicity of arrangements in different countries today, in different member states of the SADC. And we have therefore had to balance, to reflect a different balance in different jurisdictions between the Constitution, other laws, and this model law. To give you an example, some of you sitting on the Public Accounts Committee are representing a constitutional committee, a statutory committee established by your constitution. Others of you are representing a committee not established by the Constitution, but established by your Public Audit Act. And yet others of you are representing a purely parliamentary committee, which is not adverted to in the Constitution or in any other law, but which rests on the inherent jurisdiction of parliaments to establish committees to scrutinize the executive. We therefore have to allow in the model law sufficient flexibility to ensure that in domesticating this law, you will adapt it and modify it so as to avoid overlap with your constitution or other laws, and certainly to avoid any conflict between it and your other laws. And footnotes to the model law in a number of places animadvert to particular potential overlap and give an indication to the domestication committees in due course where they will need to oversee, adapt, and modify. With those introductory remarks, I will now seek to share my screen with you and show you the particular aspect of the model law to which I would like to draw attention. I would ask someone from the Secretariat very kindly to let me know now orally, are you able to see my screen?
We are.
Thank you very much. So I hope honourable delegates can see that I have started you here in part 2 of the model law, aims and objectives. As I've already said, I believe this to be fundamentally important in ensuring that your citizens feel ownership of this. But I think, if I may say so, it's equally important that you are comfortable that these provisions, that these principles represent, properly articulate the ideals and aims and objectives that you have as parliamentary committees in overseeing public financial management. I note that, and Honourable Facilitator Dr. Gordon Moyo will be aware of this, I note that some of these provisions have been considerably enhanced as a result of the input of the distinguished international members of the technical working group. As a result of their intervention, these are the purposes of the model law as articulated in clause 9, to foster accountability, transparency, independence, and modernity through efficient and effective processes that are to flow into the raising of revenue, expenditure of revenue, accounting for revenue, and parliamentary oversight. I make 2 points here. First, I draw the attention of distinguished honourable delegates to the fact that this is not in the preamble. This is in a clause in the model law. It is operative law. The distinguished keynote speaker, Honourable Brian Dubé, who is himself an extremely distinguished and esteemed legal colleague, may address us later on the court's increasing willingness to construe the provisions of an act by reference to the purpose clauses, those clauses within the act which as operative clauses articulate the purpose by reference to which individual provisions are to be applied, construed, and interpreted. So that is the first thing that I'd like you to have in mind when you read the provisions of Part 2. Secondly, I would like to draw the attention of distinguished delegates in particular to the reference to expenditure, because very often in terms of parliamentary procedure, we consider the raising of funds through the budget, estimates based on estimates of expenditure. I was very struck in the first consultative forum that we carried out. Distinguished Honourable Secretary General will recall that we showed a video clip that had a number of young citizens from different Sadc states expressing their views. And one of them gave some very trenchant views in particular. She said, I know that the government has spent a great deal of money on improving the infrastructure for road vehicles, the transport infrastructure for vehicular traffic. And she said, that's great. But she said, in this country, most of the roads are in the big cities, and I don't live in a big city, and I don't expect to go to a big city. And I would like to know that some of the money is coming my way, to put it bluntly. I would like to be able to see that there is oversight of expenditure in a way that reflects a fair balance of expenditure to benefit different classes of citizens. And we have taken care later in the budget documents to ensure that the flow of expenditure and the direction of different flows of expenditure will hopefully be transparent through the budget process in a way that gives that citizen the confidence and understanding that she was rightly and clearly and very articulately seeking. Leading directly from that is a clause on measurable outcomes. Distinguished delegates will forgive me if I say that the citizenry trust what they can measure. Sometimes the citizenry come to distrust words if they are merely words, and they like to be able to test and measure against benchmarks that you can touch, so to speak. And we have therefore incorporated an aim, and again, this is an enforceable aim as a matter of administrative law, that in the optimization of revenue and expenditure, there should be a scheme that includes measurable benchmarks for testing success, targets, outputs, measurable benchmark outputs. And we have said that those should be aiming at the optimization of revenue and expenditure, the avoidance of unauthorized expenditure, sustainability, and this is where honourable delegates today are particularly addressed, parliamentary accountability and oversight. And of course, there is much more that the bill has to say about those matters, to which we will come shortly. Then the bill articulates in clause 11, public financial management principles, transparency, accountability and participation, something that you as parliamentary committees, I know, hold very dear. I serve a number of parliamentary committees in the United Kingdom Parliament, and both lawyers and clerks advising those committees spend a lot of time thinking, how can we maximize public participation in the parliamentary committee process? And I know, as you do, that a committee is never so gratified as when its proceedings are taken sufficiently seriously by members of the public for them to wish to participate. And that is as much true in relation to public financial management as any other parliamentary committee. Oversight principle directly relates to the committees represented here today, but it goes beyond that. It includes Parliament, but it includes the National Audit Office, and it includes other bodies with regulatory functions, which may involve sectoral regulators with particular influence or control over state-owned enterprises, for example. And finally, the responsibility principle, to which I have already alluded. To underpin the responsibility principle in the way that I have already described, we have here a set of public financial management values. And these are values that I would like to think you will support the inclusion of as part of every public servant's identification with her or his relationship with the Act on Public Financial Management. Integrity, independence, impartiality, equity, professionalism, accountability, and responsiveness. I mentioned the footnotes that advert to the need to modify and adapt by reference to the content of the Constitution. I have also put in clause 13 that gives the courts no room for doubt that that is your intention. Part 3 details the authorities that control the process of public financial management within the executive. The Minister of Finance, the Secretary, the Finance Secretary, the Ministry of Finance, with its general functions being spelt out again to get that balance right, I hope, between simplicity and certainty, accessibility and accuracy. Accounting officers within each government department are very much the linchpin of financial integrity within the department, and we set their role out in some detail. And finally, the Auditor General has more provision later that we will see when we get there. Part 4 deals with public funds. I'm going to go through some of these parts quite fast because you will all be very pleased to hear that I'm only invited to speak for another 17 minutes. So I'm going to go through some of these parts quite fast. You have the documents made available to you through the chat function. And of course, I will take questions, comments, instructions, and guidance on any aspect of the model law entirely at your convenience. So I'm not going to spend long on the public funds, which I think is quite mechanistic from your perspective, and I believe it to be relatively clear. Supply and appropriation is where the parliamentary functions begin to bite, so to speak, and we have a standard system of supply and appropriation through consolidated fund acts or appropriation acts, which of course jurisdictions will vary with the nomenclature that they favor in accordance with their existing systems. Appropriation in aid. One of the aspects of flexibility that was mentioned before was supplemental budgets. Supplemental budgets were mentioned in the video clip as potentially undermining the budget process. But yet, of course, you can't avoid them altogether. Appropriation in aid is one of the ways where parliamentary control through approving an appropriation act that includes appropriations in aid, it allows you to set flexible parameters without losing overall control over the appropriation system. And I commend clause 33 to your attention in that regard. Part 6 deals expressly with parliamentary control, and it does so in accordance with what I have articulated as the parliamentary engagement principle. And that is the principle that Parliament should use the full range of mechanisms available to it for the purpose of overseeing and controlling the public financial management process. Honourable Madam Secretary General, in her remarks this morning, adverted to the range of parliamentary committees that exist and are represented here today. There is the ubiquitous Public Accounts Committee, but there is a range of other committees and other mechanisms within each parliament to which the engagement principle expressly adverts. Committee hearings and inquiries, including advised by external experts, but also plenary questions and debates, written and oral questions, and ministerial statements. Here, in subsection 3 of clause 35, honourable delegates will, I hope, see that I have tried to be very careful to advert to the role of standing orders and not appear to usurp it. It is very important that Parliament should remain completely in control of its own process. And even as enacted in this model law form, it is in a number of places in Part 6 and elsewhere made clear that it is standing orders of Parliament that will determine precisely how different processes are intended to run. And the model law mandates and describes, it does not prescribe the procedure of Parliament. So in this case, expressly subject to standing orders, the model law describes the processes and functions that Parliament and committees of Parliament may undertake in order to carry out its oversight and audit role, establishing inquiries, requiring support, requiring reports, work plans, reports being backward-looking, work plans being forward-looking, requiring the Auditor General to prepare and submit reports, working very closely with the Auditor General, requiring the disclosure of commitments, compelling the attendance of witnesses, always in accordance with your standing orders, using technology to detect financial irregularities. There is, of course, a slight typographical error there, which I've just taken the opportunity to correct. Detect and report financial irregularities, and evaluation and reports. And the parliamentary engagement principle is addressed to the Minister and the Auditor General, and it is also addressed to and to be controlled by the Speaker of the Parliament, subject to individual jurisdictional variations. The Auditor General will have a core statutory function, but her or his relationship with Parliament is also fundamentally addressed in clause 36. There is to be an independent commission. Those jurisdictions that have a standing public service commission may prefer to vest this function in that commission, and an independent commission in consultation with the leader of the governing party, the leader of the primary loyal opposition party, and the Speaker will appoint the Auditor General, and the Auditor General will regulate the procedures and proceedings of the office. At the meeting with Auditors General last week, a number of suggestions were made about decoupling the Minister from the Auditor General, even in relation to the making of regulations about the mechanism. And that is something that we have taken away to work into the model law as revised. And I therefore draw it to your attention now as a detail of the model law that you should expect to change to enhance the independence of the Auditor General. Status of course, is protected, with the Auditor General being accountable to Parliament and independent of government. The Auditor General will have access to information, so parliamentary committees may choose to get information themselves independently or to receive it through the Auditor General. National Audit Office will have its own system and mechanisms, as is understood. And the general participatory functions of the Auditor General in cooperation with, in partnership with Parliament, is set out in clauses 41, 42, 43, the Auditor General providing audits and reports to Parliament. We now come to the Public Accounts Committee itself. 44.1, clause 44.1, is required to reflect again the different approaches that different jurisdictions may take in their own pre-existing law. But the Public Accounts Committee, in essence, is any committee of Parliament established with terms of reference that include performing the functions set out that we will see in one moment. And again, it is fundamental that the Public Accounts Committee, in accordance with standing orders and procedures of Parliament, should regulate its own procedures and proceedings. And the Speaker is mandated by the model law to assist the Public Accounts Committee to provide an independent, effective scrutiny and oversight of government. And there are specific pointers given as to how that should be achieved, including, of course, the published register of interests and guidance for addressing actual or perceived conflicts of interest. The Public Accounts Committee is responsible to the Auditor General and publishing them alongside responses to the reports. The Public Accounts Committee is also mandated, in accordance with the parliamentary participation principle, to maintain a complaints portal, which may be electronic, but it doesn't have to be exclusively electronic or indeed at all electronic, a portal through which members of the public can reach the PAC to make complaints or to provide information. Again, we are going to look again at the minister's role in making regulations here. It's a little bit challenging because if it isn't the minister, who is it? I have given you, however, a lock here for a parliamentary resolution to be the trigger point for enacting those regulations. The Public Accounts Committee is given its own enforcement powers to report, to require reports, and to require oral and written evidence. And the people who are subject to your jurisdiction in that sense include the Finance Secretary, any accounting officer of a public body covered by the model law, and any public official with responsibility for aspects or instances of public financial management. And once again, it will be standing orders that control how those requirements are imposed, but they will be backed up by a criminal offence in accordance with penalties that reflect each jurisdiction's own penal practices. Finally, in part 6, and I hope honourable delegates will forgive me for having spent some time on part 6 because of its special nexus with this morning's proceedings. Finally, the PAC is mandated to make whistleblowing arrangements. I do not need to tell honourable delegates assembled this morning the importance of having a whistleblowing outlet if the parliamentary scrutiny of public bodies is to be effective. And ultimately, as we all know, the link between effective action against corruption and the protection of whistleblowers who come forward in good faith to make allegations which may or may not be substantiated, but which are made in good faith, that link is unbreakable. Part 7 includes a standard national budget procedure with the standard parliamentary control, with in particular requirements in accordance with standing orders to ensure that individual budgetary proposals can be identified and objected to require implementation of recommendations, and to individualize components of public financial management systems. I know that honourable delegates will share the frustration that many feel when it's an all or nothing budget, with no ability to go in and do microsurgery on it, so to speak, and we have attempted to address that. Environment is another way by which financial controls can be undermined, and we have tried to preserve flexibility. You have to have environment. There has to be a flexibility to via from one fund to another, but within an overarching control that means that it is not allowed to undermine the fundamental processes. The budget process, the estimates are all as you would expect. I draw your attention to some specific documentation which we have included because we think it will be of particular benefit to parliamentary committees. Departmental objectives, a sustainability fiscal policy, a sustainable development goals statement, a statement on international commitments and projects, a statement on equality and diversity, a statement on past year and future year implications, a statement on multi-year budget projections, and finally, a public debt statement. All these things we believe are important for your effective scrutiny and also for citizen engagement. An equality and diversity statement as part of the budget process makes a very powerful statement to citizens of how equity and fair treatment is at the heart of one of the most important government functions, the raising and spending of the citizens' money. Again, for flexibility, there is provision about in-year development and delays and variations, as well as withholding of appropriated funds and unauthorized expenditure. Part 8 on government debt is detailed as it has to be, and I will advert to any specific issues relating to it that honourable delegates asked me to come back to. For present purposes, I simply note that the debt schedule is required to be part of the public debt statement made available to parliamentary committees as part of the budget process. The debt ceiling and limits with continuing scrutiny, again, are designed to combine certainty with necessary flexibility. Part 9 is about procurement, and I believe that delegates will not be surprised by any of its contents. Public accounting principles, the only thing I want to say in relation to that, particularly addressing PAC members and other colleagues this morning, is that we are focusing on resource accounts in accordance with international best practice, because as we saw in the video clip, cash is not the best way of monitoring proper use of resources. One has to be able to look to other aspects of the use and deployment of resources, and resource accounting is therefore to be established by the model law as one of the norms, and the Auditor General will apply a resource audit approach in scrutinizing those accounts for a true and fair view. And the ministry will be required to prepare whole of government accounts for the same reason, to give you a holistic view of what is in front of you each budget year. I am conscious that I have 2 minutes left, and I wish to ask the Honourable Facilitator, Dr. Gordon Moyo, if in order to spend a couple of moments on part 11, which is of some importance, whether he will permit me to overrun my address by 3 or 4 minutes.
Please go ahead.
That's very kind. I talked about this before, and I said we do want to set up good principles that people identify with, but we also want to be able to control and punish financial misconduct, misuse, and maladministration where it occurs. And this is any public official. That the parliamentary committees represented today should be able to feel that public officials are accountable to Parliament, but also to the law, so that Parliament can uphold the law in scrutinising their behaviour. There is an offence of public financial misconduct. There is an offence of misuse of public funds. But for evidential reasons, there is also a wide offence of maladministration. And here a report, which could be a report of the Public Accounts Committee, or another investigation or inquiry with a parliamentary input, that report may identify a public official as having failed properly to discharge a function or otherwise behaved improperly. And that ability to identify and alert the public to misbehavior, I believe, is at the heart of effective parliamentary scrutiny and an important tool for you, and it potentially leads to other enforcement action as described. Part 12, I have already spoken about. There is only one other thing I wish to say, and that is to draw attention to, in Part 16, there is a general offence of contravention, but what I want to draw to your attention here is that there is a general power to make regulations. This would be the minister, and it would be subject to parliamentary control, parliamentary scrutiny under clause 132. But we do have to have the flexibility to have supplementary regulations and also supplementary guidance. I believe in the value of informal but published, transparent and accountable guidance issued by the executive and scrutinised by Parliament as described in subsection 3B. Honourable delegates, I apologise for having overstayed my welcome this morning by a minute or two, and I hope I have given you a sufficient overview of the provisions of the Act to enable you now to give me your instructions, your challenges, your questions, and your comments. I thank you for your patience.
Then rundown, for the quick rundown, it's 70 pages, and you managed to cover that in a very short space of time. So thank you very much. Now it's open to the honorable members to make their contributions, to interrogate some of the provisions, to question, to give us the input. You can show by raising your hand and I'll recognize you. As you are doing that, those that will need interpretation, please check on your screen. You can choose the language that you want to use, and language that is there is provided here. At the same time, members can post their questions, their interventions, their contributions on the chat there, or they can prepare even more comprehensive contributions and interventions and send them to the office. I'm sure the email will be provided there, or is already provided for you to email your inputs. But for now, we have Mohammed. Yes, Mohammed, the floor is yours. Mohammed is which country? I can't see.
Mauritius.
Hi, Mauritius. Yes. The platform is yours, Mauritius.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir. I have two questions. The first question is in relation to the proposed section 48. the powers given to the Public Account Committee to call witnesses. I don't know why the decision is to limit the power to call witnesses limited only to the finance secretary, accounting officer, and public official, when, for example, in section 47, you're giving a complaint portal, which presumably means that we will be receiving complaints from members of the public. And in what should be section 49, whistleblowing, there is protection given to people who would depose in front of that committee. So I can't see why we should limit the ability to call for reports, to call for inquiries from only these 3 public servants and not to the larger group. For example, why can't the PAC not call a supplier, for example, if there's an allegation of malpractice involving a member of the private sector? So that was my first question. So I'll wait for that answer, and then time permitting, I'll come to the second question.
Okay, go ahead, please.
I'm very grateful.
Okay,
I'm very grateful to the delegate from Mauritius for that.
Yes, and
question.
finished. Sorry, Greenberg. Just a minute. Let him also present his second question.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. The second question is in relation to the proposed section 113, disqualification. A public officer who has committed financial maladministration may be disqualified from a specified office or appointment by resolution of Parliament. So I wanted to, first of all, get clarification when you say that an officer who has committed financial administration, is there just an allegation, or must there have been a conviction by a court of law? When you mention that the public officer has committed financial maladministration, and then don't you see that there may be a problem of separation of power if we don't have a conviction, and the legislature, Parliament, is taking sanction against a public officer? Isn't that a usurpation of the function of the judiciary? Thank you.
Thank you, Mauritius. Again, Greenberg, just a moment, just in case Madagascar is a similar case. So take down those 2 questions. And while we also get a contribution from Madagascar, then you respond one. Madagascar, Mohamed, you can put your hand down.
Oui, merci, monsieur. Pour moi, c'est pour la mise en œuvre de la loi type sur la loi des finances de la Sadc. Je pense qu'il faudrait distinguer les pays de la Sadc parce que la capacité de l'économie de chaque pays est très différente. Par exemple, il y a des pays, par exemple à Madagascar, qui a de faibles espaces budgétaires avec des économies fragiles. En plus, le Covid qui frappe la santé de la population. Il y a aussi les catastrophes naturelles, telles que le cyclone, où il y a déjà 3 qui frappent Madagascar. Il y a aussi la famine dans le sud. Donc, il est nécessaire de mesurer cette idée et de bien distinguer les pays dans la zone Sadc. Au point de vue
throughout the SADC region. Also, when we consider the budgets, we need to see the principle for the annual year. this time frame is different. The duration for investment is for 7 years, and for the political power is 5 years. So we need to discuss all these things and to agree on them. Thank you very much. This is what I had to say. Could I also take the floor because I requested the floor? Can I speak, please?
Thank you. I didn't, excuse me, just a minute, just a moment. I didn't hear the interpreter. Can you confirm that the interpreter?
Yes, she's requesting the floor. Madam is requesting the floor to add to what the Madagascar delegate has just said.
Madagascar. Or
the second delegate from Madagascar is requesting the floor, please.
Anybody who was Madam, hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Greenberg?
Merci.
Thank you.
J'ai quelques questions par rapport
I have some questions about budgetary control. I am the chairperson for the evaluation of public policies at the National Assembly in Madagascar. And this model law which we are having is talking about parliamentary control, which is going through parliament institutions and through the Auditor General. And my question is to ask, eventually, the adoption of this model law, does it mean that there will be some national provisions when we talk, for instance, about Madagascar, about evaluation process of public policies, or that one should be supplementary? And when it comes to the appointment of the Auditor General, it is mentioned in clause 36 that it should be appointed by an independent commission or committee. The question I'm asking is, how will that committee be set up? Who are the members of this committee? What is their mandate? So that there can really be independence within this committee. As my colleague has mentioned, in Madagascar, there is not much we are doing for budget control in terms of cyclones, the pandemic of COVID-19, especially for independent budgetary control. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the presenter who has been very excellent.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, they can hear you, sir.
Thank you. Greenberg?
Yes.
Daniel?
Yes. Do you want me to respond to those points
yes,
now?
We have many hands, so please be brief in your response so that we can take as many. But can you confirm to me that the interpretation to English for Madagascar was done? Because I didn't get it from my.
Yes, I heard an English interpretation.
Oh, okay, that's all right. Briefly, so that we can take more hands. Go ahead.
I will do my best to be brief, but those are technical comments of some complexity. So I will try to combine brevity and accuracy. In relation to the comments made by the distinguished delegate from Mauritius first, on the question of witnesses, I don't disagree with that point at all, and I would be very happy to expand the range of witnesses, but I remind us that, of course, Parliament has very different approach and powers in relation to the interrogation of private commercial witnesses compared to when there is a public official before Parliament. In particular, I remind us that in relation to a commercial contract of the kind that the representative mentioned, you would have to consider laws of self-incrimination, you'd have to consider laws of privilege, you'd have to consider laws of legal professional privilege. I have absolutely no objection to widening the pool of witnesses, but there are issues that the parliamentary committees would have to consider for themselves, as usual, when dealing with non-public officials before them. So if the honourable delegate would do us the kindness of sending in that response with any details of the class of witness he would like to see included and any conditions in relation to that, we will definitely give it fullest consideration. On clause 113 and whether it's limited to conviction only, well, as presently crafted, it is not. My own view is that the answer to the question about separation of powers is that this is not a problem of separation of powers. And the reason is that the only sanction available under clause 113 is disqualification for public offices of a specified kind by resolution of Parliament. Those are not penal sanctions of a kind that a court, in accordance with the separation of powers, would impose. Those are offices that are under the control of Parliament, and it is for Parliament to determine whether an official is proper or improper to fill that role. So I believe that there is not an issue of separation of powers, but again, I am enormously grateful for the perceptive and penetrating challenge, and I would encourage the delegate, if he is able and willing to do so, to put it in his written submission, and again, I will consider it as carefully as it clearly deserves. In response to the first delegate from Madagascar, I accept the point completely that we have to operate a differential approach for different jurisdictions. The Honourable keynote speaker, the Honourable Brian Dubé, alluded to that in his own opening remarks. And in a number of places, that is reflected in the model law in ways that I have shown this morning. If the Honourable delegate believes that there are aspects of the model law that require further express flexibility for that purpose, perhaps he will be kind enough again to put that in writing to us, and I will ensure that attention is given to it. He mentioned in particular, sorry, I beg your pardon, by the way, I believe that the delegate was male, but I may be confusing this with the voice of the interpreter. So I hope honourable delegates will forgive me if I refer to somebody by the wrong gender, because I was hearing the interpreter's voice and not their voice. The first delegate from Madagascar also alluded in particular to emergencies and disasters of a cyclonic or other nature, and those are referred to in a number of places expressly in the model law. Again, if the delegate feels they should be expressly referred to in other places, please let us know in your written submissions. Time limits the same. There is flexibility for different timing limits under the model law, and the same principle applies. In relation to the questions of the second delegate from Madagascar, yes, I agree, there will need to be national provisions supporting the provisions of this model law in relation to the evaluation process of public policies in jurisdictions that don't already have them. As I said at the beginning of my remarks, we've had to strike a balance between knowingly overlapping in some cases and not overlapping in cases where we think that would be inappropriate. But in domesticating this law, that balance will have to be adjusted according to each national circumstance. And finally, in relation to the appointment of the Attorney General under clause 36 and how will the independent commission be established, as I say there in drafting footnote 22 to clause 36.2, some jurisdictions already have an appropriate public service commission under their constitution or otherwise, and I would expect in those cases that commission to be used. Other jurisdictions that do not have an appropriate mechanism will have to establish one. If the honourable delegate from Madagascar feels that we should make some provision about the establishment of an independent commission, again, if she will favour us with some thoughts about the essential components of that additional provision in writing, we will certainly give very full attention to the challenging and important issues that it raises. Those are my responses to the points made so far.
Thank you, Professor, for those remarks. Can we now move on to Namibia, followed by Botswana at the same time? I think Ithapelo should be Botswana. So Namibia first, then Botswana.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you very much, Mr. Greenberg. Thank you also other honorable members and the Secretary General. My first point that I would like to raise is on the appointment of the Auditor General, whereby it is stated here in the model law that the appointment is to be done by a commission. Now, the reason that I'm raising is the fact that in Namibia, it is a constitutional provision that after Parliament has recommended the candidate, this person has to be appointed by the president. So my question is whether we should keep to that instead of a commission, or whether it has to be changed to establish a commission to do the appointment. The second point is a point that has been clarified by Mr. Greenberg also, and that was the fact that ministers to make regulations. That in itself would not give independence to the Auditor General in the sense that the regulations are not coming into the House for discussion. It is regulations that they are making there, and we have got a very bad experience of such things already in Namibia itself. So I think it is good that it has been sorted out. The third point that I would like to raise is on the Public Accounts Committee itself, whereby it is stated that Public Accounts Committee has to be chaired by the opposition, which is very good. But in some jurisdictions, like for instance ours, there is no clarity whether the deputy chair would also be from the opposition or whether it would come from the ruling party. Thirdly, there was an issue that was mentioned on the PAC that PAC should not be dominated by the ruling party. What is it exactly that you are meaning with PAC not to be dominated by the ruling party? Because in essence, the ruling party's backbenchers are more in parliaments, and we would like to know what this is meaning. I thank you very much.
Thank you. Very short and sharp questions. Botswana?
Thank you very much. My first point is on the need to have mechanisms for buy-in of the model laws by Sadc PF, the buy-in of member states, particularly executives in our countries. I don't know if there can be a way to bring this to the attention of governments at Sadc Summit, or alternatively, our economic high command at the Ministry of Finance. Because by and large, in many Sadc jurisdictions, in Botswana is no exception. Legislation is seen by and large as a prerogative of the executive. In other words, bills are brought by ministers of government in parliament. And it's very rare, very, very, very rare for a private member's bill to pass. We have made attempts, some of us, to take some aspects of the model laws of Sadc PF and present them as bills in parliament as a private member's bills, and they've been rejected. So I'm just worried that we may need to find a way to get these brilliant ideas to the attention of executives, either, as I've said, in the Ministry of Finance or heads of state and government at a Sadc summit. That's my first contribution. The second one is I've not been able to read through the model law, and I was just wondering, in our jurisdiction in Botswana, we have special funds, and I don't know if this is the case with other countries. We have special funds like your alcohol levy, in which every time you buy alcohol, there's a levy that's collected into a special fund with a clear objective of sort of mitigating the adverse effects of alcohol in the society. And then we have many such levies, like the National Petroleum Fund, the tobacco levy, the roads levy. So these special funds, I was just wondering if the model law, if there's any aspect of the model law which speaks to the special funds. I'm particularly worried about this aspect because these are substantial amounts of money. And in our country, it runs into billions. And the law as it is allows the minister to authorize the use of monies from special funds for a purpose other than that which is stated in the fund order. All the special funds have fund orders, and these fund orders will regulate how the fund should be used. But the provision permitting ministers to authorize the use of funds for a purpose other than that which is stated in the funds without clear parliamentary authorization or resolution, it presents an accountability problem. And the reason I say this is because these are substantial amounts of money. So, and I was wondering if the model law speaks to that. On the last point raised by my brother from Namibia, in terms of domination of the ruling party, it has been a problem. It has been a problem in some countries where sometimes you find that the ruling party will make majority of members of the Public Accounts Committee. In our case, it's 50-50. 5 members from the opposition, 5 members from the ruling party, and it's always chaired by the opposition. I'm the chair. I'm the current chair, but I know in the past there have been this problem of imbalances. I guess is because also in our parliament there's been that challenge of the executive dominating parliament. Our executive, I think, it's about close to 45% of parliament. 45% or so members of Parliament of Botswana are members of the executive, and they also represent more than 60% of the ruling party caucus. So this presents a challenge when it comes to committees. I think let me stop here for now.
Thank you, Honourable Member from Botswana. Your first question will be, I will rather have the Secretary General respond to your first question rather than Greenberg. If the SG is here, please prepare to respond to that question, or if she's not, whoever is next senior to respond to that question. But before we can go to the responses, let's have Sebastian and Ruth. And you can put your hand down, Honourable Member from Botswana.
Thank you, sorry.
Sebastian, which country are you?
I'm from the Seychelles.
Seychelles, please.
Yeah. Do I have the floor?
Yes, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the Sadc PF for organizing this this very fruitful meeting, which has allowed me to touch base and see what is happening within the Sadc PF. As you may be aware, the Seychelles, in relation to the Corruption Perception Index, we were able to make substantial improvement this year. And I think we are ranked first in Africa. And in relation to the Auditor General, our Auditor General has been ranked as one of the most independent. And this has come from one very important perspective, and that was political will, which can cost in the long term. So I would like that, first of all, for the presenter to weigh in on, in the preparation of this model law, have you considered how to entice or stimulate political will to ensure that the changes which you are proposing through this model law is accepted by the executive? We had a former president who wanted to embrace these ideas, but in the long term, it would expose issues within the government, which eventually would cost political parties the leadership of their countries. So that's one question. The second issue which I would like to bring to your attention is that you've made several comments within the presentation which you have made, and I wonder whether you've had the opportunity to consider the law from the Seychelles. Am I still on?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Yes. And in relation to the law from the Seychelles, a lot of the issues which you're discussing, we encapsulated in the act which we brought about in 2012, but there will be, we are anticipating that there will be changes to the act. One of the things which I would like to propose you include is that we are now in a position whereby when it comes to the national budget, we process everything in relation to grants, loans, donor funding through the budget, through the appropriation in the budget. So the National Assembly has direct access to knowledge of what grants is going through the system. There is no outside or special purpose vehicle that is used in relation to grant, because that has to be part of the financial policy process, which the minister has to present under our current law to the National Assembly. We, however, have a problem with the current government, which has started introducing the concept of special purpose vehicles, which my brother from Botswana was alluding to, whereby you have funding, extra budget funding, which can be used by government through policies. And in that respect, I disagree with Mr. Greenberg in that policies should only be enshrined in relation to subsidiary legislations that are tabled in Parliament, so that Parliament can decide whether the executive power which we have given to the legislative power which we have lent to the executive, it is actually using it for the purpose that it intends to use it. My final point is in relation to the Constitution. In the Seychelles, our powers emanate from the supreme law of the land. So as the current chair of the PAC, I can call in any witness. I can supersede any law, because my powers are enshrined in the Constitution. I have the same powers as the Supreme Court in compelling the attendance of witnesses when it comes to any particular case or issue which can be under investigation. And in our case, I react to the report of the Auditor General. I can initiate investigations, but I can also through resolution of Parliament, act on issues that have been brought to our attention by members of the public. And we hold all our sessions in public. So the issue that I would like to point out within the model law which you're proposing, there has to be a balance, or there has to be a consideration given to how you reinforce what you want to propose to achieve through the model law by enshrining this and encapsulating it in the supreme law of the land. If you do not do that, and I've heard several members mention this, even the member from Mauritius, you run the risk of creating a situation whereby you would want to investigate an issue, but some witnesses will be out of your reach. And just to give you a quick example, we had an investigation in the past through the PAC, whereby we compelled the director generals of private banks here. And they argued that under the Financial Institutions Act, there are some information which they cannot give in relation to confidentiality. We recognize the importance of confidentiality, but The Constitution states that in relation to an investigation or any issue being investigated by a committee of Parliament, Parliament has the power to compel the attendance of any witness. So I wanted to see whether when it comes to the model law, there can be additional input made in relation to strengthening how the law proposes to go about ensuring that Parliament can exercise its oversight and scrutiny role. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Charles. Very interesting contribution and a very interesting case that you presented to us about the powers of the chairperson of the park. Very interesting indeed. But before there's a response again, I would rather have Ruth. Ruth, please. Ruth, you are from which country? Ruth.
Angola.
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 Told it has come to my attention that there is no
South
Angola.
South Angola. I am from Angola.
Just a minute. It has been brought to my attention that there is no interpretation in French. Can the ICT people look at that? Go ahead.
Há eco, eu estou a ouvir a minha voz. Não sei se estará um dispositivo ligado aí, excelência, que possa desligar o áudio.
Já está desligado.
Sim, senhor. Obrigado. Eu estou a ouvir a minha voz, à medida que estou a interpretar.
Só um minuto.
A minha voz aí.
Não tem som.
Angola, you have the floor.
Melhorou?
Tem uso da palavra. Eu agora vou passar para o canal de inglês, porque certamente deixarei no ouvido. Espero. Faça favor.
Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much. There is a lot of feedback in the Angolan space. I've asked them to check their devices because I can hear my own voice in the background. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I would also like to add my voice to the colleagues who applauded the Sadc Parliamentary Forum for organizing this event, which I consider of extreme importance, so that we may approach the matters associated to budget formulation. Before anything else, I would like to, according to what I read and according to the presentation, notwithstanding the fact that it was rather fast, the presentation, there is a matter which I would like to put forth and which has to do with that position that Mr. Daniel Greenberg presented initially as an initial note to do with the citizen from the rural area and that complained that the infrastructures built were in urban areas, but in the rural areas there was nothing. What I would like to accentuate here is that our budgets are in fact faulty because of that. That has to do with the budgeting program. The issue is Parliament vis-a-vis and in relation to a budget program. We continue to budget as 50 years ago, 100 years ago, because in fact we don't take into account the importance of planning the budget. I think this is a matter which we ought to approach in detail in the proposed model law. The other matter is that has to do with the participation of our population in the drafting of the budget. In fact, we put together very nice looking budgets, but they are done from, taking the capitals and the major urban centers into account. Outside, in the communities, in the rural areas where the problems are, we are not paying enough attention to that. I would also like to see the model law emphasize somehow this matter. The other issue that I didn't see here and that I would like to see, because it is something that more and more we need, which are the existing discrepancies at on the gender level. That these are to be so in other words, the gender perspective in the drafting of the budget is important to approach this year. Our countries are beginning to take some steps towards gender equity. The gender law also ought to emphasize this issue. The final decision rests with countries, but if this is contained in the model law, it remains as a target, as something for the countries to aim at, so that in our respective realities, so to speak, we may undertake this path. These are the matters I would like to put forth here in as my contribution. And again, I would like to greet the Sadc Parliamentary Forum and to applaud Mr. Daniel Greenberg for the work in depth that he is undertaking, that he is presenting to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angola. Thank you very much. I see some hands, but allow me, Dr. Charles, allow me to get back to you after some responses from Greenberg. I think he has had a lot of questions already. So we will come back to you. But for now, I would rather have Greenberg responding. Greenberg, there are two questions that you may choose to respond to, or you may not, because they are political in nature. One from the honorable member from Botswana, and the other one from the honorable member from Seychelles, which both speak to the issues of political will. I thought those questions would be better responded to by the Secretary General. But if you feel you want to say something around them, you can, but you are not compelled to. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, the Honourable Facilitator. I had already come to that same conclusion myself in respect of those two questions, and I'm grateful to for your support in that respect. The Honourable Delegate from Namibia asked about Clause 36.2 and whether different approaches could be taken in particular jurisdictions to the appointment of the Commission, and I very much agree that that is likely to be the case. And indeed, as I have already adverted to, footnote 32 makes the point that it will be necessary to contextualize according to each jurisdiction. The Honourable Delegate from Namibia also drew attention to the question of the composition of the Public Accounts Committee and asked in particular in relation to Clause 44.5b, how does one avoid domination by the governing party in a parliamentary committee? And I say two things to the Honourable Member for Namibia. The first is that this is one of the reasons why the model law does have to be subject to the processes and procedures of each individual parliament, because different parliaments have different approaches to the rule about majority standing within different select committees. The parliament with which I am most familiar, the Parliament of the United Kingdom, there are some select committees that must have a government majority. There are some select committees that must not have a government majority, and there are others that may or may not, depending on the circumstances. So the model law must respect the parliamentary traditions of each jurisdiction. However, I would say to the Honourable Delegate from Namibia that the aim articulated in Clause 44.5b does not refer to a majority. It talks about domination. And I would say to him that that is a concept which is not necessarily the same as majority composition. And it may be that even in a jurisdiction that has a majority of members, of government members on the PAC, it may be that there are parliamentary mechanisms to prevent that majority from stifling the expression of the minority opposition members. I merely invite him to consider whether there are representations he could make in writing that would enable me to sharpen up that clause with a specific view to enacting the principle that he has described in the jurisdictional circumstances that he has described. I think, if I may say so to him, I think this is a particularly important point in the effective functioning of the PAC. And if he were able and willing to provide some further advice in writing, I would find it particularly valuable to consider whether we can nod at it more effectively. I pass now to the comments of the Honourable Delegate from Botswana, and I do accept the Honourable Facilitator's invitation not to address the question of political buy-in, which is not for me to address. I will permit myself the following quasi-technical observation. In my view, a bill of this kind is not appropriate for a private member's bill, and I say that not as a political observation, but as a technical observation. I do not know of any jurisdiction in which the private member's bill procedure is designed to accommodate bills of this complexity, sensitivity, and technicality. Subject to that, I make no comment about the engagement of political will. Special funds were asked about. Yes, I agree. They are already adverted to in clause 54.3b, but we could advert to them in other places. They do have a subversion potential. We talk about special accounts in clauses 28 and 29. Hypothecation through a special account is always difficult, as honourable members know better than I do. But yes, I could say more about them. And if the honourable delegate from Botswana would be kind enough to submit some more details of what they believe the special fund provisions should be addressing, I will be very delighted to look at that. I come now to the comments from the honourable delegate from Seychelles, and I again accept the invitation of the honourable facilitator not to respond to the first question. I would say that I have to make sure that this bill is transparent and clear in what it does. I have to make sure that the provisions of the model law are clear. It is not for me to provide in the text of the model law the necessary political will, and the Honourable Secretary General, I'm sure, will have observations to offer about that. The Honourable Delegate from the Seychelles mentioned the importance of including grants and sources of all kinds in the budget. I believe that is already provided for expressly in the model law. He mentioned SPVs in particular, which again are covered in a number of ways. I would encourage him to, again, if he were able and willing to suggest in writing any specific detail about how SPVs and special funds should be addressed, then as with the Honourable Delegate from Botswana, I would be particularly delighted to see those and to think about them. The Honourable Member from Seychelles said he disagreed with me about policies and said only if tabled in Parliament. I think he must have missed my express reference in my presentation to the laying before Parliament and the tabling in Parliament in clause 133b. I do not understand, therefore, the nature of his disagreement with me, and he will have, I fear, to be kind enough to set it out in writing, and then I will, of course, look at it and do whatever is necessary to accommodate him. He also said that the POC should have power to compel any witnesses. I've responded to that point in response to the Honourable Delegate from Mauritius, and said I will be definitely happy to include that. And as I said to him, we will, however, need to think about the special circumstances that appertain when you have a non-public official before you, and that will be something that the Honourable Delegate from Seychelles is already very familiar with. And he mentioned his particular constitutional position under the Seychelles Constitution. So again, I agree with that, subject to the caveat I made before. In response to the Honourable Delegate from Angola, I believe that some of the issues to which she adverted in particular are already addressed by the model law, in particular by requiring a transparency and sustainability and equality and diversity statement to accompany the budget. I would invite her to look at clause 62 on equality and diversity and consider how far that takes us along the path that she was outlining in relation to gender balance in particular. And if she were able and willing, having looked at clause 62, to suggest strengthenings and modifications of that, if she were able to suggest in writing some specific aspects that we should make clearer and stronger, I would be enormously grateful for that, and I shall look forward to aiming to address her comments. I hope that deals with the comments that were made.
Thank you, Greenberg. Where is Dr. Charles? Dr. Charles, you had your hand up for a very long time. It's your time. The two questions on political will be stood over until the end of the session, where we will request our Honorable SG to make a closing remark and at the same time respond to those broad questions. But for now,
thank you very much,
oh,
Mr.
yes, please
Chairman.
go ahead.
Thank you very much, and I'm sorry
Which,
that I
which
joined.
country, by the way? Which country?
I'm from Tanzania, not the Republic of Tanzania.
Thank you.
Tanzania
flow.
I'm a member of the Parliament and a member of the Budget Committee, as well as the committee dealing with the trade and industry. I joined late, unfortunately, and I did not. I was not privileged to see the presentation which was made, but I wanted to make a few remarks because I know I have gone through the terms of reference, and the remarks also are based on what I have heard my colleagues talk about. First and above all is the question of regulation, the whole question of the model of the model law. I was thinking that this is supposed to be tailored to each country, and that's what I think is going to happen. It becomes like a framework for tailoring a law, the law that will govern financial management in each country, but then with the specific articles which suit the country. Because, for example, there are many things which I see in the context that in Tanzania we are quite open, and the PAC is very powerful. It can summon anybody from any public body to answer and to explain things that happen in terms of financial mismanagement. So I do not think that it's something which is going to be very difficult for Tanzania to adopt. But I think it will really require to look at some things. For example, I saw in the terms the gaps that were mentioned about the targets on public debt. The target on public debt, I don't think is very realistic. It should be a target on maybe budget deficit to GDP, something like that. But if you look at public debt, it depends on specific country circumstances and what resources the country has. For example, if a country is rich in minerals and is rich in natural resources, the public debt may be a little bit accommodated. And there is no reason why we have people are talking of 50%, 60% of GDP as a target for public debt. I think that is a little bit different in each country. The sustainable fiscal deficit and sustainable public debt it depends on specific country circumstances. So we cannot have a common target for all countries. And I think there are many countries that have more than 60%, but when they are assessed objectively, they are found to be sustainable in terms of debt and in terms of the public government deficit, budget deficit. But again, I'm curious about the performance-based budgets. For example, and I will request the resource person there to help us to give me an example of what type of KPIs can you set on the government in terms of financial management objectives. I have a problem with supplementary budgets. Supplementary budgets, in my view, supplementary budgets must be approved prior to the end of the year. They should be approved probably by the second half of the fiscal year, because if you approve budgets, the supplementary budgets retrospectively after the budget cycle is over, then the budget, the parliament will not have much control over what happens in terms of how much the deficit will be if the government are allowed, for example, to consume and then later on to report and then they to get a parliamentary approval of what has already happened. The issue of opposition and the PAC composition, public accounts committee compositions. In some countries, for example, in our case, the opposition is very small. It can become very a big minority, and that doesn't meet the concept of official opposition. They are minority, but they are very few in the parliament. So you cannot actually, under those circumstances, say that necessarily the PAC will be chaired by the opposition, because there are no people. And of course, when you are looking for a chair, you must look for a capable personality. But also, again, I think this is a very special circumstance. It happens in many countries, can happen in some cases where you do not have acceptable members of opposition to chair and or to dominate the PAC. But there's nothing much on the budget committee. I think the budget committee also has a lot of say in terms of transparency of the budgets, in terms of meeting commitments, that international commitments, because definitely the budget committees are very proactive in terms of budget preparation. And in this case, I think there must be a way to ensure that we give more responsibility in the model law to the budget committee, so that they can ensure that these international commitments and regional commitments can be achieved. But this is the same also in terms of the. I do not think that putting limits on quantum of contracts the executive can enter into is very reasonable, because you may paralyze things. But I think to the extent that these are audited properly by the Auditor General, and the Public Accounts Committee have the role to look at these contracts once they have been entered into. I don't think we should limit and say that, okay, they should await a parliament to approve or to. I think this will cause a problem to the executive. But it depends really on whether the threshold you are talking about. I think the proposal here, which I saw here, was a 3% limit. If it's more than 3% of GDP, then it must go to the parliament. I don't think there are so much big contracts that they will enter into anyway. It should be a lot of money, but I don't think that there will be so many. But for example, we have the standard gauge railway. The contracts, of course, could be of that magnitude, up to about 3% of GDP. But again, they are approved by the parliament retrospectively after the executive have entered into such contracts. They are brought to the parliament. The parliament will definitely give a go ahead, because there will be motivation about it. So this is what I wanted to submit. But I'm very sorry that I did not go through the presentation, and so I may be talking something which may not have been said by the presenters. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable. Thank you, Tanzania. Will respond. For now, let us have Malawi. Honorable Gladys from Malawi.
Thank you so much, moderator, for recognizing me. I've got one issue. I've listened to the presentation, but what I've noted, as my honorable colleague from Tanzania has indicated, is there is total blackouts with regard to Budget and Finance Committee of Parliament in the model, Sadc model law of public finance management. And that will create a lot of challenges. I'll give an example. In Malawi, we are reviewing our PFMA as we speak, and we've made proposals on the areas that we want to see amended in the Public Finance Management Act. One of the areas that we've proposed to be included in the amended one is that we should have in-year reports, because as we speak, we don't have, of course, we normally have mid-year budget session, but it's totally up to the minister to decide whether to have it or not. It's not mandatory for an honorable minister to have a mid-year, budget review. So we've included that in the Public Finance Management Act that is being reviewed, and also there is an issue of public expenditure tracking. As Malawi Parliament and from the budget itself, we are not doing much in terms of public expenditure tracking. And yet that's one of the mandates of the Budget and Finance Committee of Parliament. So we've clearly indicated the roles of the Budget and Finance Committee in the new public finance management that is being done. And again, our mandate as the Budget and Finance Committee of Parliament, we are supposed to be engaged in the whole monitoring of the budget implementation process, but that is not done. So it's got a lot of gaps that are there in the current Public Finance Management Act, and we are taking the opportunity to make sure that now Budget and Finance Committee comes clearly in the new Act, so that our roles should be clearly defined in the new Act. Now, if now that is missing in the Sadc model law, then we'll have problems, because it means we're going backwards. We'll not be able to influence anything. They'll come back to say, no, in the Sadc model law, there isn't anything to do with the budget. And yet, there's everything to do with the budget, because there's a difference between Public Accounts Committee and Budget and Finance Committee. In my Public Accounts Committee, you are doing with the auditor's reports. It's Public Accounts Committee, and you're doing public accounts, Auditor General's reports. Whilst the budget is doing online checking, it's doing implementation checking. It's providing checks and balances whenever the budget is being implemented. So if we are going to leave budget and finance out of the whole thing, then we are going to have a problem. Now, someone talked about the numbers in the Public Accounts Committee and also Budget and Finance Committee. In Malawi, it's chaired by an opposition member of parliament. And as I said earlier on, I'm the chairperson of the budget. The challenge that is there is that for political parties, it's their leadership that do appoint members into those committees. So the leadership will decide who to get into those committees. That is fine when it comes to political parties. But when it comes to those that are independent, it's the speaker herself determining who should be in the budget. And what has transpired is that the speaker, whoever the speaker is, chooses people, independent members of parliament that are sitting on the government side and not on the opposition side. As I speak, there are 21 members of Budget and Finance Committee in Parliament here. In Parliament here, but just 5 of them are from the opposition. The rest are from the ruling party because the Speaker has got powers to appoint membership in the Budget and Finance Committee. That is an irregularity as far as I'm concerned. Now, if we leave everything into the hands of the jurisdiction itself and not forcing other countries to do certain things that are right, that are good for transparency and accountability purposes, I can assure you we are not going to move forward. But there are some countries whereby we need to apply force from Sadc level. And such countries, one such country is Malawi. There is need to come up with that model law, which is very commendable, but also enforce it from the Sadc level. Because if we just leave everything to Malawi Parliament, then nothing will change because it is highly politicized and everything else goes with numbers. Whether it's a good policy or a bad policy, as long as government says, let's approve it, we're going to approve it. As long as the opposition says, even if opposition says we should not approve it, government will still approve it because they have numbers, regardless of what the people are saying, regardless what the actors are saying. So there is need also to look at individual countries and see how best those countries can be assisted. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Malawi. Thank you, Honorable Gladys. I really appreciate and really accept the concern that you are raising, and I'm sure our drafter will engage you. Let's take the last one before we go to the responses. Honorable Freddie, which country are you?
Thank you, Mr. Moyo. I'm coming from Zambia. I'm the chairperson for the Planning and Budgeting Committee. And just to thank Greenberg for his presentation. And I think my major concern is just on part 8 of the whole document, which is under the government borrowing. Generally, I see where I think the minister has been given too much powers throughout the document. And this, I think, is a concern which has already been raised by some of the members, somehow indirectly, when it comes to the issues of borrowing. I say so because you find, even in the same document, when you come to the issues of for example, the debt ceiling, where you're proposing to put it at about 60% or so, if that goes, and when the current document as it is, you may find a situation which is happening anyway in most of the countries now. By the time you realize that maybe your debt ceiling is above 60, 70, 80% to that of GDP, then when you look at the whole issue, you find that because the ministers are being given too much power, by the time these documents come to Parliament, and sorry to use that term, you find it's like just Parliament does rubber stamping. So I wanted to see, in a way, in a document that which guides maybe step by step. For example, say before any borrowing is done, can that come to Parliament for approval as number one? Obviously, we still have those challenges of where you find maybe if you are in the ruling party, and usually they have the majority numbers, so you find technically approvals are given. And also the issue of supplementary budgets. Can we see this coming for approval to Parliament before the actual spending is done? So that was my point. I feel in part 8, if I thought there was a way of maybe restricting this, I'll give an example like in Zambia, where we have been working on a document like the Loans and the Guarantees Authorization Act, which which has, in fact, been on the table for a very, very long time, where we thought before contracting any kind of debt, this debt must be approved by Parliament, as opposed to whereby the minister will just come on the floor of the House and then he give you the figures of the current debt situation. So I just wanted to come in and just to say if there was a way of looking at the part 8 under the government borrowing, where you try to give more teeth to Parliament, either through committees. I submit. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Fred from Zambia. Thanks for the submission. For now, let's have responses from our legal mind. Greenberg.
Thank you, Honourable Facilitator. In response to the comments made by Dr. Charles Kimei, the Honourable Delegate from Tanzania, yes, I agree, it's a framework for each country, and I said that in a number of places. Yes, it requires to be contextualized, and the footnotes in the document draw attention to specific contextualization issues. I would encourage the Honourable Delegate, as I have said to others, if he would be kind enough to write with any specific areas where he thinks contextualization raises difficulties, and indeed the Honourable Delegate from Malawi drew attention to some of the difficulties of contextualization in some areas. If he would be kind enough to send any specific areas where he thinks contextualization can be further supported in the text, I will be very grateful to him and will certainly give attention to that. If I may say to him, the Honourable Delegate from Tanzania, if I may say to him on the question of the debt target, that is something that's very difficult because the model law needs to jump in one direction or another. And it is difficult this is one of perhaps the most difficult places to combine certainty and flexibility with the ability for different jurisdictions to contextualize without completely undermining the safeguards and protections in the model law. I therefore will be specifically inviting the technical working group to reconsider the debt target in the light of his observations and other observations that honourable delegates to this and other consultative forums may provide. And in that context, in that spirit, if he has any particular evidence or support for a view that we should change the target in a specific way, perhaps he will be kind enough to provide that through to the consideration to be given by the technical working group. Same on performance-based budgets and supplementary budgets. We have not provided, as he says, we have not provided a backstop for the end of the year for supplementary budgets. I would certainly be happy to consider that. If we do that, of course, then we have to consider what do you do for budget variations after the end of the year. But of course, we can take that into account if you would be kind enough again to indicate how he prefers that particular point to be dealt with. I also, if I may say to the Honourable Delegate from Tanzania, I completely take his point about the need for specific flexibility on the composition of the Public Accounts Committee, and in particular his point about the strength of the opposition in any particular jurisdiction, and indeed at particular times, because these things ebb and flow, don't they? You know, sometimes the position can change in a jurisdiction. I repeat what I said in my response to the Honourable Delegate from the Honourable Delegate from Botswana, No, excuse me, from Namibia. I repeat what I said to the Honourable Delegate from Namibia, that yes, we do need to avoid domination, and there are perhaps different ways of avoiding domination. And if I may say to the Honourable Delegates from Namibia and from Tanzania, their different contributions on the question of the composition of the PAC focus brilliantly the difficulty of getting the model law balance right, because they are, if you like, at two extremes of the situation. So I will look forward to reading both of their observations and seeing if we can strengthen that point so as to provide something that works for everybody. And that brings me to my observations in response to the comments of the Honourable Delegate from Malawi. And all I really want to say is I completely agree that we have to get a balance between allowing people to contextualize, which we must do, and not allowing people to contextualize the model law out of all possible purpose and effect. And I think that I think the Honourable Madam Secretary General, when she addresses the political will points shortly, may have some observations on how we incentivize effective domestication, allowing contextualization without allowing what I would call dilution of the principle. And if I may say to the Honourable Delegate from Malawi, I heard her comments very clear on that, and to the extent that we can nod in that direction helpfully, then we certainly will, in accordance with the directions of Madam Secretary General. Finally, in response to the Honourable Delegate from Zambia, yes, I take the point about ministerial powers under Part 8, but can I turn back the question to him and indeed to other Honourable Delegates and say, one of the things that we are clearly going to have to struggle with in revising the model law is a lot of different people want some of the ministerial powers diluted or modified. Fine, we can do that. But answer me this, who then makes the detailed regulations? Right? There has to be detailed subordinate implementing legislation. We cannot have an effective model law without implementing regulations. Who is to make them? My first answer in the, obviously this is not a question for now, this is a question inviting further discussion as we go through the consultative forums and further written submissions. But my answer in the model law is, there are things where the executive has to make the regulations, but Parliament has to approve them and control them and scrutinise them. That was my opening shot. That has not entirely found favour with all delegates in all respects. So, okay, let's hear let's hear your views for alternative mechanisms that allow proper, flexible implementation while retaining parliamentary control. And if Madam Secretary General, who I know is about to speak, if she would just permit me one more observation before she does, it may be that what we have to do is tighten up the specific parliamentary control mechanism, approval mechanism of those regulations that are particularly sensitive because they relate to the issues that the Honourable Delegate from Zambia mentioned, or other issues being mentioned by other delegates. That is something that we will have to take away and think about. I again thank all Honourable Delegates for their perceptive challenges.
Thank you, Greenberg. The Honourable member from Malawi, I thought she raised the specific question. She felt that the budget committee is invisible. It's document. If I got her right, she felt that the document, our draft, is muted on the issues pertaining specifically to the budget committee. Do you think you responded to that? And did I get you right, Honorable Member from Malawi?
Yes, you did.
Okay. Sir Greenberg.
To the extent that I failed to respond adequately to the point of the Honourable Delegate from Malawi, I wonder if she would be good enough. I have to say I did have slight difficulties at some point in the sound quality. I wonder if she would be good enough to adumbrate her concerns on that particular point in writing, and I will definitely take it into account.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I'll do that.
Honorable members.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Honorable members, we are now drawing towards the end of the meeting. Before I invite the Secretary General, I still have some 5 minutes. If there is anybody with a follow-up question, follow-up intervention, or a new contribution, we don't want to close out any idea. We need all ideas. So this is your time. If you have got anything, Honorable Brian Dube, then Honorable Member from Botswana, in that order.
Thank you very much, Doc. I just wanted to give a response to what Prof. Greenberg indicated relating to the issues of interpretation by the courts and how we must model our laws so that there are no contradictions in terms of the intentions of us as parliamentarians in the Sadc region and what then the court to interpret our laws to mean. I am sure he made that in his presentation to say, in terms of the perspective on interpretation, how do we model our law to make sure that it achieves what we want, because we have also the judges to interpret that particular law. And my response will be quickly as follows. Literally, we need to make sure that our model law is as simplistic as possible, with the general meanings clear and not subject to misinterpretation in terms of the literal rule of interpretation. And I believe that the model law that I have perused, which Prof. Greenberg did, by and large, he achieves this by making sure that there are proper definition of terms in terms of what we intend them to mean, and also it is very simplistic for everyone to understand. It's not complicated in terms of the jargon, which is very, very important in terms of how we need to model our laws, because our main challenge comes with interpretation, especially if we come up with very complicated laws. And also my view would be that after the laws have been put in place, it may also be very important to then also have symposiums with the judges and chief justices by the Sadc Parliamentary Forum, to make sure that maybe the mischief or the intentions of Sadc in terms of coming up with this particular model are actually made clear, and we get to understand and appreciate the efforts of the Sadc Forum in this purpose, because the mischief of the law is what is more important, because you will note that not all the countries will adopt or domesticate this model law, but obviously as soon as it becomes a model law in the region, the courts may start to use it here and there in applying the domestic laws, as always happens in the case of Zimbabwe. Our High Court and the Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court always borrows from these regional instruments and regional acts. So it becomes very important to make sure that the mischief or the intention or the desires of Sadc in terms of coming up with this law are made very clear, so that we do not have illogical and insensible judgments coming in terms of how this law is applied and interpreted. That's all I wanted to say, Honorable Mo. But personally, I'm impressed with the language and sequence of the model presentation, because it makes the whole law very simplistic, which is actually the smartest thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Dube. We are very excited to hear those words. I mean, the compliments are very important whenever they are due. Thank you very much. Honorable Ditapelo Lefoko, my apology. That's your time.
Thank you. Yeah, on the earlier point which I made regarding a political will, the response was that there's a complex law which it would be more easier if it has the buy-in of government, I would assume, and be brought by a minister of government, in particular Minister of Finance. I would want to believe that's what Daniel sought to say. But what my observation is that with regard to all the other SADC PF model laws, two of which I participated in discussing and ultimately adopting as a substantive member of SADC PF then, I'm no longer a member now, was that the model laws, when you compare them with what we have in Botswana, for instance, they are not necessarily, if you look carefully at them, requiring an overhaul of our systems or our laws, but to augment. That is why my comment on a private members bill was sort of against that backdrop. That when you read through the model law and you look at the laws in a country like Botswana, the model law serves a purpose of improving what's already in existence. That is why, in that context, my view was that even a private bill can suffice insofar as implementation of the model law is concerned. It may be different in a country where there's a need for a complete overhaul, but in our case, I don't think that is the case. Whether it's model law on elections, whether it's model law on HIV and AIDS, whether it's a model law on prevention of child marriages and protection of children already in marriage, these require just to augment what is already in existence, because some of us are far ahead in terms of some of these things. I thought I should make that point clear. And I think my question remains, again, in terms of what needs to be done to get the buy-in of executives. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Honorable Member from Botswana. Your question, we heard it last time. We heard you very well. But thank you for enhancing it. It will be responded to by the Secretary General. I see more hands now, but briefly, let's have Tanzania.
Thank you very much. I just want, my question is a small one. How do we submit our written comments?
Oh,
Mr.
okay.
Chairman,
thank you very much.
Written comments?
Okay, thank you very much. I think the SG is also listening. She will respond to that. Honorable Gladys from Malawi.
Yeah, thank you once again. I wanted to find out through you, moderator, if we have a SADC committee, or rather caucus, for the chairpersons of budget and finance, or even planning, so that whenever we push our recommendations to have the budget issues included in the model law, should be something that is applicable in most countries. Because I may push in something that is only applicable in Malawi and not the other countries, because as the honorable member from Botswana has indicated, that they are very far ahead and they may not need such an inclusion. So it's better we have a small focus on these issues, and it should be for the budget chairpersons or the finance chairpersons together and agree on what exactly we're talking about and what should be included in the model law. And the second one was the issue that the honorable member from Tanzania has asked. I wanted to ask to check how are we going to submit the written comments. Thank you. Thank you.
Did I get you well, honorable member from Malawi? Honorable Ganda, are you proposing a consultative meeting of the chairpersons of the budget committees in the region, similar to what we had today? Are you proposing that? Okay, we'll be able to respond. Thank you very much. You can put your hands down now. Both of you, honorable members, your hands down. Malawi and Botswana. If your hands are up, I will assume you still want to say something. So you can put your hand down. Thank you. Can I go to Greenberg? Is there a specific question that was directed to you and your closing word, your closing remark, your closing word? Greenberg.
No, Honourable Facilitator, I believe I have responded to all the questions put to me. I'm enormously grateful to everybody for their observations, and I will look forward to reading any written submissions, and we will definitely do our best to revise the model law to reflect the expressions made today, for which we're enormously grateful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. It is our tradition in Africa here to clap hands for somebody who has done well. I'm sure members are clapping hands wherever they are for you, for the sterling work. Now what remains for me to do is to invite our esteemed, distinguished Secretary General to respond to some of the questions, clarify some of the issues that were raised, and also give us a pack after lunch. But I felt that you have made your contributions. There is, I think, unless there is a very strong disagreement, but looking at the contributions, I think we have come to that time where we can have our Honorable Secretary General Poema Sengoma. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Honorable Dr. Moyo. And honorable members, allow me to address you while seated at this point. It is not out of disrespect, it's just the convenience of where I am right now. Wow, this really has been an interesting session, which I truly appreciate. I appreciated the issues of the concept of political will, which we all know are quite complex and play out differently in most of our countries, because a lot of times one needs to look at the motivation and the intent for them to come up with an indicator of the lack of political will or political will that is in each country. Honorable members, allow me just to also say that political will can be tackled. We need to look at avenues of consistent advocacy. We need to also look at the fact that the model law, as already indicated, and as you have already testified, is a robust advocacy tool in itself. And as Rampas puts it, a model law is actually a model, no more and no less. So as a SADC Parliamentary Forum, we look at this as a model or a gold standard. And we don't intend that at the national level, there should be any contradiction in this respect. So at the end of the day, once this has been adopted by our organs, we realize and recognize that some countries may have reservations because they believe they're ahead. Some countries would look forward to the model laws informing their countries as a benchmark, because when we develop model laws, we don't actually have a specific country in mind. We come up with a model law because it's a template, and this template could be used in numerous jurisdictions across SADC. I believe that answers the issue for Tanzania and many other countries. It is also true, honorable members, that we need to think of political will throughout, because domestication struggles will not change in a day. Hence, the model law is to act as a catalyst to accelerate understanding and harmonization of norms. If this model law is adopted by the 51st Plenary Assembly session of the Forum, we believe that it will still depend on national legislative action. So we leave it up to you as honorable members to assist in making sure that the domestication process evolves according to the requirements and complexities of your national realities. It will differ from state to state, that we acknowledge, and that is what Dr. Greenberg has been emphasizing throughout his presentation. Where we sit at the SADC Parliamentary Forum, we believe that we can only look at capacity development sessions where members of parliament can lobby through public normative frameworks such as this one. We believe that member parliaments could also lobby the executive at national level to ensure that they borrow from the best gold standard or the model that they have put together. We have admitted that the provisions of the model law will not take on board every scenario, will not tackle every country's unique situation, but we must underline or appreciate the fact that this should be seen as a gold standard where possible, to allow us to benchmark against it. So with the necessary parliamentary evolution, the model law provisions that are contained in this draft will progressively trickle down and find their way into domestic law through your lobby, through your advocacy, through your capacitation processes at national level, for other members to appreciate that this was never meant to contradict or usurp the powers that you hold as lawmakers in your own jurisdiction, but it was meant to be served as a benchmark or as a tool that you can use and that can improve your systems or create the gold standard that is found elsewhere for us to be able to borrow from and improve the SADC region. In closing, honorable members, this consultative process today has demonstrated to me, and I believe my colleagues, the beauty and brilliance of parliamentary deliberations, which is everything that the forum wants to promote. Divergent views are essential so that the model law is robustly tested in view of finding its way to a smooth adoption process once tabled to the 51st Plenary Assembly session. Parliamentary logic takes care of the view that people themselves will take control and enhance the quality of the deliberations that you have today, and ultimately the adoption of the model law. And it is imperative to hear your views on this model law. We believe you'll go back and consult the people. There is a consultation that is planned for civil society, which we believe that will also add value to this process. Allow me to thank you, honorable members, Let me thank Dr. Daniel Greenberg, and don't ever feel you're taking too much time. This is where we gain insight into the thinking that went into the model law, and also to respond adequately to some of the issues that are tabled. We've done quite well, and thank you for always stepping in and giving us a lot of insight in this process. Let me thank Honorable Gordon Moyo for always being available despite his busy schedule, and for always offering his skill and knowledge in processes where he has experience and technical know-how. And let me allow the technical working group, thank them for always being present and assisting us in this process. We have an onerous task ahead. We have to receive written submissions from yourselves, honorable members. Kindly email us at pfm@sadcpf.org. pfm@sadcpf.org. Your submissions will be considered, they'll be weighted. We'll look at what can be taken on board. Where we're unable to do so, we'll explain at the time of validation, or we need to come back and explain that this has not been successful for the following reasons, or we may need to look at another tool to take on board some of the suggestions. I took note of the request from Malawi on putting together, committees, committees focusing on budget. I will consult internally and look at the resources that we have to see if that is feasible. However, we do invite you to also still make written submissions from your respective countries for us to consider. The calendar has been drawn up and quite congested. I wish we had shared it with you, but we will endeavor to make sure that we can respond to some of your requests where possible. I thank you, honorable members, and I wish you a good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are.
Thank you, Madam SG.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have come to the end of our session, of our meeting, of our program. God be well. We can now close the meeting. Thank you.
Admin, kindly terminate.